Strengthen Local Climate Commitment Monthly National Collaboration Call. Welcome. We are tonight we are highlighting goal number 5 of Strengthen Local Climate Commitments, which is, yes, think globally, act locally. And this program, well, actually, let me just go back to introductions. So please do, so that we all know who each other is, at least as far as we can do that through Zoom. Please post your name, your pronouns, your congregation, where you're located, and the traditional home of the Indigenous nation that on the land that you are now living. And if you do not know all that information, that is okay, but we do like to honor the Indigenous nations that inhabited the land we are currently on. So thank you for doing that in advance, and I will post mine when I get to when I trade off to Bill. Okay, so I am, for many of you have not been in sessions with me, so I will just let you know I'm Doris Marlin. I am a member of All Souls Church Unitarian in Washington, D.C. I am a member of the Unitarian Universalist Ministry for Earth, the UUs for Social Justice that act and advocate for federal legislation here in the DC area. My academic background is water resources management. I am retired from federal service. I have a few credentials to my name, and I have been a 4-time observer at prior COP climate talks. Currently am the campaign lead of the Strengthen Local Climate Commitment campaign, of which this meeting is partly about. What, in a nutshell, and because we won't go into a lot of the details of Strengthen Local Climate Commitment tonight, that's saved for another time, but essentially we advocate to pull together a strong climate action plan, or whatever your local government calls it, and we want to strengthen it, accelerate it by working in partnership with the local representatives who would enact that and implement it. The Strengthen Local Climate Commitment goals are listed here because we don't want to have just a climate action plan. We want one that emphasizes justice and equity. We want to be in partnership, not necessarily at odds with our elected officials and all of those government and contract workers that are trying to implement it. We want to include disaster preparedness in that plan, and that is a key area where you can work to achieve justice and equity. This campaign is to network and movement build. It's not just the Unitarians in your community. It's not just the faith groups in your community. It's not just the Sierra Club. It's everybody networking together and building a local movement to have a stronger local climate commitment implemented in your vicinity. So tonight it's all about goal 5. Think globally, act locally. We also have the goals of being visible, advancing social justice, aligned with our UU principles and values, and of course, vote for climate candidates. So we will begin with prayers for the planet. And I would just like to introduce this and let you all know that over the next 5 weeks, as we hold these sessions, we will open each event with prayers for the planet. And this is done by the invitation of the Interfaith Liaison Committee for the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. They are present and active, preparing events, pulling together spiritual and mindfulness and prayer and faith-oriented events for all of the events associated with the Framework Convention on Climate Change. And so there will be a global movement of groups just like us, or you can do this as an individual, doing prayers for the planet. And I will put the link to this initiative into the chat a little bit later. It is also on the website. And so with that, let me introduce Reverend Kevin Carson, who is the senior minister at the UU Church of Idaho Falls in Idaho. And he is also a UU Ministry for Earth board member. Welcome, Kevin.
Thanks. All right, well, good evening and greetings from the Snake River Plain in eastern Idaho, just west of the Tetons and Yellowstone National Park. This land has been the ancient hunting grounds for indigenous peoples going back to Paleolithic times, and most recently it has been the home to the Shoshone-Bannock tribes who still have a reservation further south down the Snake River Plain. As the world readies for the COP27 conference, I think about all the millions of people around the planet who are working for environmental justice, demanding action on climate change, and fighting to preserve biodiversity. And it can be very hard work at times, as we all know. It can be very frustrating and can challenge our spirits and drain our energy. So I wanted to read something tonight that speaks to finding solace and healing in nature for the work we do. And what I chose was a poem from Nancy Wood, which is really more of a prayer. It is one of the readings in the book Earth Prayers, which is one of my go-to sources for inspiration. It's a book that came out in 1991, and if you're not familiar with it, and I've turned to this book many, many times over the last 31 years. I highly recommend it. It's got endorsements from Joanna Macy and Thomas Berry, so you know it's got to be good. So it's a great collection of readings, and I've given away many copies over the years to people as gifts, and I've started giving it to the new members of the UU Church in Idaho Falls since I started serving this congregation in August 2020. This is my original 1991 copy, and it's become so brittle now that it's starting to look like some kind of ancient codex. So I'm going to read from my newer copy, and so let me just read this to you from Nancy Wood. My help is in the mountain, where I take myself to heal the earthly wounds that people give to me. I find a rock with sun on it, and a stream where the water runs gentle, and the trees which one by one give me company. So must I stay for a long time until I've grown from the rock, and the stream is running through me, and I cannot tell myself from one tall tree. Then I know that nothing touches me, nor makes me run away. My help is in the mountain that I take away with me. Earth, cure me. Earth, receive my woe. Rock, strengthen me. Rock, receive my weakness. Rain, wash my sadness away. Rain, receive my doubt. Sun, make sweet my song. Sun, receive the anger from my heart. May it be so. Thanks.
Maryland has one of 23 state action networks that work on legislative issues in their states. And they are all affiliated through the coalition of UU state action networks. So we're in Washington state, we have one called Justice Washington. So that's an example of different state action networks?
Ours is called the UU Legislative Ministry of Maryland, and we lobby primarily to the state legislature here.
Right. And Phil was pointing out, hey, you know, the planet will be fine. It's life as we know it that will not. So I just wanted to acknowledge that his comment in the chat. So back to the presentation. So as we all know, it's all over the news. And you can see the UU the vote, correct? Right. Okay. So
Yeah,
as we know, we are in the final days before the midterm elections, and whatever the outcome, climate action, climate justice, the efforts are still so critical. And if it does not go in the direction of those that try their hardest to take climate action, and it goes in the direction of those that don't believe climate change is happening, I just want to emphasize that makes it even more critical. The burden falls even more to the state and local actors, which of course is why Strengthen Local Climate Commitments exists. All right, so a little bit of a story about thinking globally, acting locally. I live in the DC metro area. I am within the Beltway, and even though our metro system that is crumbling and old needs upgrades, and essentially right off of my balcony is a torn up, what used to be a really nice forested, well, you know, semi-forested area. And it's, you know, 5 years behind schedule. And I see the effects of this painful construction effort every day for the Purple Line. I know that in my county and in many of our counties, transportation tends to be one of the major emitters of carbon in our area. And so it is critical that we do things like solve our emissions problems, one big bite at a time. And so I tell myself, well, thank you, Purple Line, for messing with my life and in my backyard, because I know that what the Purple Line does, which will reduce our local emissions, is going to be good for Montgomery County. It will be good for the state of Maryland. It will be good for the region. It will be good for the country, and get us closer to our nationally determined contribution of reducing our emissions by 50% by the year 2030, which has a positive, or at least a less harmful effect to the globe, specifically the global south. So every climate action is connected, even and it's connected. What we do here at the local level helps the global level, assuming it's a reduction, and vice versa. All right. So why are we here? What are the goals of this series? Essentially to make the COP more accessible and understandable so that we can collectively reduce now and future risks, to provide a platform to live our UU principles in connection with the COP as we address the moral issue of our time, which is climate change. And our role as a denomination professing social justice is to ensure that the voices of the vulnerable are amplified where any important decisions are being made. So turning it over to bill. So essentially that is what I'm hoping, we're hoping that you will get from this series by participating in these discussions. Thank you, BJ. By watching one of the online events, by participating in a discussion, by watching the event and bringing your opinions, what you learned, what you got from the event to the group and sharing. All right, so over to Bill.
So I'm going to work on several aspects of the COP. The first and probably the foremost thing is the issue of
Are your slides supposed to be showing?
Yes, I'll get those in a second.
Okay.
The first will be the issues regarding what the COP will do. The second will be the agenda of the COP. And the third will be how you can find out what's going during the COP. So let's start with the issues for the COP. And I've prepared this presentation about nationally determined contributions. And I'm going to start by quoting the Paris Agreement. As you may remember, in 2015, parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change agreed in Paris to keep temperatures well below 2 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels and pursue efforts to limit the increase to 1.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. That's a quote from the agreement. In fact, what that means is that emissions would need to decline by at least 45% by 2030 compared to 2010 levels to meet the 1.5 degree. This is from the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change Secretariat. Instead, they are likely to rise by 10.6%, not down by 45%. And this is out of Axios. So the report says the goals must have more ambitious net zero emissions goals. The current targets are not credible, and nations have delayed so long in cutting emissions, they'll have to pursue rapid transformation of societies to meet these goals. Now I'd like to show you some graphic indications of what's going on. This is the emissions curve in greenhouse gas emissions in billions of tons. So you can see back in 1990, it was 35 billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions. And it's measured in terms of CO2 equivalents. That rose to over 50 by 2020, when the first emissions reductions were to take place, according to the Paris Agreement. The commitment was made to reduce by 2020. Some did occur, but we have to be a bit cautious because also 2020 was the beginning of the pandemic. So it's quite clear that that may have had an effect. Now, if you look at the top quadrangle or triangle up there, you see INDCs, and INDCs are actually indicated nationally determined contributions. They were the ones that were promised before Paris. And as you can see, they would keep going on the curve that was there before 2020. They would have continued on up to 62. In fact, they did bring it down to 55, but it's still above what's needed. Then the lower triangles are indices as of 2022, the promised indices as of this year. So we are on the right track if those are taken into effect, but not all of the commitments will be made. Where do we have to do this? Well, these are the areas the sectors where emissions reductions have to take place. Energy is the big one. As you can see, that's quite high. IPPU is industrial processes and product uses. These are the emissions kind of built in to the products we buy and how they're made. Agriculture, another big one. That's the use of the land and the release of certain chemicals from the land when it's tilled, notably nitrous oxides. LULUCF, which stands for land use change, and forestry. That's very closely related to agriculture, but also involves forestry. And finally, waste. And that's a big one because of the methane from waste. So these are the big emissions over on the right. The carbon dioxide is, of course, the main one, but methane is very closely behind it. And there are the nitrous oxides and hydrofluorocarbons, which were developed in response to the Montreal Protocol to reduce ozone-emitting chemicals, ozone-depleting chemicals, I should say. They were a substitute for the old chlorofluorocarbons, but they became a bad greenhouse gas. Then there's perfluorocarbons, sulfur fluorides, and nitrogen fluorides. And finally, the last category is short-lived climate pollutants. So you can see where the challenges are in these sectors and gases. What do we need to do more in? These are the areas where we have to emphasize reductions. And I won't go into the subsidiary curves there, just the top ones. Energy supply, transport is the second one. Buildings is a big one. Industry, agriculture, land use change in forestry, and finally waste. The same things we talked about earlier, but you can see where the reductions have to be made. And finally, the IPCC projections. Now, this first part of the curve reproduces that earlier curve I showed you where you see the INDCs on top and the NDCs, the indicated nationally determined contributions on top, and then nationally determined contributions. But both of them are way above what's necessary to keep temperatures below 2% centigrade. Remember, that's in the agreement, keeping them below 2%. And even higher, or I should say that the need to go lower is at 1.5 degrees centigrade. So we're way overshooting. Even if we were to go on the stronger NDCs that were promised this year, we still would be out in the 2060, way above those curves. So you can see what's necessary. So this brings us to the end, the ends. The carbon budget, we are almost out of space. Carbon budget is a way of saying we have emitted so much of the greenhouse gases. We don't have much space left. We're just getting to the end of our possible use of the atmosphere as a sewer. We're just almost to the end. We've got to stop. Any questions about what these are? I do want to talk about one other issue that's coming up, and Doris will help me out on this one, and that's loss and damage. Loss and damage is the idea that when the emissions cause damage to certain countries, like the Pakistan floods, if you think that is a good example, other countries are really responsible for those emissions. Pakistan contributes less than 1% to current emissions. The US is more like 10%, and we are really responsible for that. Should we be sued? That would frighten a lot of people if we said it that way. But loss and damage is the question of compensation for what's happening. And rather than talk for long, I'm just going to stop at this point, and Doris, you can jump in. I'll put a link in the chat to where you can look for a good explanation of loss and damage.
that there will be a resources page that I'll send out, and we will also post to our COP27 Connections webpage. Referring to loss and damages, I am going back to the slides that I am showing. This slide is an oldie but a goodie. It is from 2011, but it does show, all right, at the time the US was the greatest historic emitter of carbon, followed by the European Union. Now, yes, China and India are doing quite a bit to catch up with us. However, even today, we are still way ahead in our contribution to the historic global emissions on the planet. And so, I mean, there's really no stronger case for how the most industrialized nations have been the greatest emitters and are the ones who causing the suffering at the level of those in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, you know, really globally. There's a horrific drought in the southern Horn of Africa. There are, you know, the unprecedented hurricanes happening in Indonesia, etc. I mean, not to mention what's happening here in the US. There's plenty going on. So I did want to provide an overview of loss and damage, but I thought I would much rather have the frontline organizers give you that that overview themselves. And what this 3-minute excerpt is from is a presentation that was held at GA this past summer, and it was called Creating Climate Justice on the International Stage. This speaker is Marguerite out of Fiji, and she, with Salote Soko from the UU Service Committee, had a portion of this presentation and gave a very good overview. I'm showing her picture because when she speaks in the three minutes of the presentation that I'm going to show, she's primarily speaking with this slide on the screen. And so I wanted to make sure I had a chance to fully show her face and name her prior to having just that screen up with her speaking. Okay.
With the highest per capita disaster displacement. Now, how do we connect our work to international fora on climate change? Forced displacement relocation impacts various human rights, the right to life, health, food, water, clean and healthy environment, an adequate standard of living, property, self-determination, economic development, and culture. These principles guide our work when resources permit. We have made submissions to the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and the Environment, and the Rapporteur on Cultural Rights. Loss and damage is a controversial issue for development partners and island nation because of financial implication it raises for us. Advocacy at previous COPs have been useful, where we've told the stories of our communities. Of course, finance is always a major factor in which we are lobby during these regional and international spaces. At COP26, a proposal for a new finance facility was rejected. Instead, the COP established the Glasgow Dialogue to discuss possible arrangements for loss and damage funding, with current discussions ongoing. I believe this has been rejected in the latest COP meeting. So the work we do highlights the critical needs for such funding facility, given the forced displacement of communities who not only can least afford to move, but also have contributed the least to the global climate crisis. We ensure the voices from our vulnerable communities are shared and amplified in spaces where these important decisions are made. These are people who have been displaced, relocated, and the hardship they face daily, the losses they've endured. These are the stories and they live the realities which we share. Thank you.
Thank you, Makareta. Makareta is one of 10 partners that we have in the region. All of them are at various spectrums or of displacement, losing their homes, what they know, what they've been given from their ancestors to keep and protect as sacred because of the climate crisis. And they are fighting really hard. They're leading a lot of the advocacy at the COPs, at the annual climate gatherings. Just last week, the Pacific has finally drafted for the review of Pacific leaders a regional framework on climate mobility to address the various types of human mobility, from evacuation, trapped migration both internally and externally, displacement, and ensuring that our leaders are doing what global leaders can't do. And that is stepping up and creating policies that protect the rights of the Pacific, and that will become a model for other regions in the world.
Okay. I wanted to give you just a tiny moment of the advocacy and work that Salote Soko out of the UU Service Committee and her partners are doing. They recently just testified on the Hill regarding climate forced displacement, regarding the initiatives they have before the COP process, and they will be presenting 5 different events that you can watch live at 3 a.m. our time, or on demand at a later time. And those are some of the events that we will be discussing, along with any of the hundreds of other events. So yes, they will have 5 programs at COP27. And so just to wrap up my presentation portion, I want to kind of bring this home about why, even though it's so discouraging, it's also, kind of the only game in town. So as far as a global response to climate change. And so I want to quote John Kerry: the Paris Climate Agreement, or you can also substitute COPs and the climate talks, they won't solve climate change, but climate change will not be solved without it. So why is that? Well, essentially, you need a global response. You need the mechanisms available as a global response for transparency, for coordination, for cooperation, and to call countries out and shame them and pressure them to do what the rest of us are at least trying to do and expect. And so those are the types of benefits you get from this type of organization, even though, we are sadly aware that it is not perfect. So with that, let me offer the floor back to Bill to make any comments, and also open for questions. And then I'll give a quick overview of the resources available and how our discussion opportunities will unfold for the next couple of weeks during COP. Got any questions out there? Okay.
About loss and damage, one report I saw had a really good quote. If you bring up loss and damage, the diplomats tend to run screaming from the room. They don't like to negotiate loss and damage. So what I'll be doing in the next 10 or 15 minutes is introducing how you can get access to the information about the COP, both while it's going on, particularly the agenda of the COP and the schedule, but also the reports on a daily basis of what's happening at the COP. So the first thing I want to show you is the agenda for the COP. Okay, so this is the agenda for the COP, and you see, starts right with 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Opening of the session. And by the way, the opening of the session will be the high-level talks that are world leaders coming in to present their country's perspectives. Right now, this has virtually nothing in it, so they push this little arrow on the right here where my pointer is, and it will show the list of the countries as they come in. Organizational matters. Now you get the details. Election of the president of the conference and so on. Adoption of agenda, adoption of other things, and so on. And you can close that up with this button going the other direction. Oops, it's supposed to, but it's not. Okay. Reports of the subsidiary bodies. We'll talk about the subsidiary bodies later. The two are called SUBSTA, that's a subsidiary body for scientific and technological advice, and the subsidiary body for implementation. Report from and review of the parties included in Annex 1 of the convention. There's no document there yet, so as the documents are produced and they'll be put online, they will appear under these arrows. Some of them are there, some of them are not yet there, and so on. Here's the loss and damage. That's not yet there. And finance, there's a big one there. I know that's going to be a matter of great discussion. So I'll put this link in the web, in the chat, the link to this website, and you can use that to find this agenda. It not only has what's happening every day, but has the documents that will be discussed each day. Now I'm going to go to a different area, and that's something called Earth Negotiations Bulletin. Earth Negotiations Bulletin is an organization that started up during the Rio Summit 30 years ago. Some of you may know or remember that that's the summit at which the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change was negotiated and signed. It was signed by George H.W. Bush, and it was ratified by the US Congress, by the US Senate, unanimously. And I always like to remind people that Mitch McConnell was a member of the Senate at that point and ratified the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. So he's on record as being one of the supporters. Okay, so Earth Negotiations Bulletin started in 1992 and has reported on the UN Framework Convention climate change ever since. And I'll put in the chat the website for UN Chamber, I'm sorry, Earth Negotiations Bulletin, that's what I want to say. But I wanted to show you this page and how it works, and then I'll show you a couple of reports from them. So I'm going back to screen share. And we should have that right here. Here we go. So this is the ENB site. I'm sorry, yeah, ENB site on climate change. And the COP in Sharm el Sheikh, November 6th to 18th. This gives you some pretty good background on what's going to happen and then what to expect. And there's actually a YouTube if you want to see that, a video. Then down here you will find a link to the Bonn Climate Change Conference, which also has some reports. There's basically nothing in the Sharm el Sheikh Climate Change Conference reports yet because nothing's happened. But in the Bonn conference back in June, there were reports. And if you click on that link, you get this page and it shows you some of the reports. Now these reports are in PDF format. So if I clicked on just downloading them. So rather than doing that, I'm going to go directly to the report. This is what it will look like. This is the summary of the Bonn Climate Change Conference in June. And as you can see, it's from Earth Negotiations Bulletin, which is part of the IISD, which stands for the International Institute for Sustainable Development. And here's they reference the dating and so on.
We're not seeing that, Bill. We're seeing still the final report summary.
Oh, I have to switch. I'm sorry, I have to switch. Okay. Okay, now it should show. Now can you see it? Earth Negotiations Bulletin?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, good. So you'll see a summary with sort of an introduction, an introductory section, and then you have this index of different parts of the report. And I always like to go right to the brief analysis of the climate change conference. It's always a good place to start. Now I've got it in small print, but I can fix that. By the way, whenever they report what a country says, they put the country's name in all caps. So there's United Kingdom, Iran, Indonesia, Ghana, and so on. That's because the governments of the various countries like to see these reports. They don't necessarily send anybody to these meetings to do the report on the meeting. They rely on Earth Negotiations Bulletin. And the governments also pay for these reports for Earth Negotiations Bulletin. So I go often right to the brief analysis of the Bonn Climate Change Conference, or the COP will be. And you get a little bit of background. Sorry about this sort of flashing. I've highlighted a couple things that are kind of interesting here. Further engagement is needed to flesh out voluntary information on climate impacts. So that's again one of the issues, climate impacts. Sharm el Sheikh is going to be a rough meeting. This will give you a good idea of what's coming up in Sharm el Sheikh. Then the reference back to the Glasgow COP last year. And the urgent need to scale up mitigation to reduce the emissions. How can an ambition ever build up if parties bridle on taking greater emissions reductions? So there's complaints about that. You can see the issue there. They will need to decide on loss and damage. So that you can see the issues are building up by going to the analysis. By the way, there is a nice glossary over here too. See, you can follow. For example, if you never could understand what they were talking about with CMA, that's the Conference of Parties serving as a meeting of parties in the Paris Agreement. CMP, Conference of Parties serving as a meeting of Kyoto Protocol parties. And here's ETF, Enhanced Transparency Framework, which is something that came out of Glasgow, Green Climate Fund. So it's also very useful to look down here at the end. Here's SBSTA and SBI, subsidiary bodies. Okay, so that's the Earth Negotiations Bulletin reporting. This is a summary report, and I also have an example of a daily report. They do daily reports, which is very useful for seeing what's going on.
And we'll use those daily reports to kind of inform and kick off our discussions.
Right. So here is a daily report. This is the Bonn meeting again, Monday, June 6th. And it gives a little bit on the opening statements. That's what you'll have next Monday, is the opening statements. The report will be on Tuesday, actually. It's edited and produced overnight. And then if you go down again and go toward the end here, you get to a section I always recommend reading, In the Corridors. You can see it now, In the Corridors. Don't worry too much about the content of this one right now, but this is what's really going on in the meeting. They can give you the background. I'm going to stop at that point and ask if any questions about ENB. I'll put the link in the chat in how you can get to the page that will list the reports. And remember, these are reports that come as PDF files. That's portable document format. And you have to have a reader, Acrobat reader, to read them. Any questions?
I do want to address a question that Sally posted. Is it okay to switch over?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Go
Okay.
ahead.
Because essentially it is frustrating to watch. It is discouraging seeing how little progress has been made, but there are areas of progress. And some of those would be, for instance, when Paris was on the table, being discussed and negotiated. The intention was for the target to be 2 degrees centigrade. And there was so much pushback, so much opposition that it was civil society and the scientists and people coming together to collectively say, all right, 2 degrees is not going to work. And that is what I don't know that it's all that led to the IPCC report that eventually showed the drastic difference between a 1.5 degree world and a 2 degree world, but it was certainly the pressure applied that made that happen. This type of conference of parties also helps be able to bring out a greater focus on human rights and on justice that would not be visible otherwise. And, you know, I am not saying that it's even close to perfect, but, you know, it in some ways, it's kind of like democracy. It's the worst form of government, except for everything else. And I want to switch to the website. Make sure you're able to see that. Okay, are you all seeing COP27 UN Climate Summit?
Yes.
Okay, great. So we are at the end of our hour. Tomorrow at 7 p.m. we are having a special session to take you through in greater depth how to navigate through all of these, links, websites. How do you pull something up on demand? How do you find the report? How do you generate the report? Where do you find everything? So that's tomorrow at 7. And, there's only so many Zooms people can join. So that also will be recorded. And by the way, where will you be able to find the recordings? All the way down at the bottom where it says recordings and supplementals. Recordings from many of our connection events will be posted here. Now, nothing's there yet because, this is the first event. So this is the page, and I am going to run very quickly through this. The key messaging that the UUs are bringing to COP are shown below, and it focuses on meaningful participation from the Global South and human rights and some of the regulars that we often see, such as finance. The agenda issues not yet posted, how to find the schedules and events. Here are the partner events that the UUSC is sponsoring or partnering on. All right, now I have to hope I can get back to where I was. All right, so are we back to you see the planet?
Yes.
Okay, good. I won't click on any more links for fear that I won't be able to go back. The US Center schedule, because the United States supports multiple science-based, policy-based, and well, even climate justice events. And you can find the schedule there. Sunday morning, there's an interfaith gathering. The details can be found at all these links right here. So I will not go into everything. Tomorrow, when we go over navigating all the COP resources, we will help you find how to watch events live on demand, a little bit more about being able to find the daily updates from the Earth Negotiations Bulletin. And with all those terms and acronyms, thank you, Bill, for finding the glossary. All the events are posted in the local time in Egypt. So here is a time zone converter. This is a listing of all the daily events that we're hosting. There will be a link here that provides more details, such as, well, what exactly are we going to talk about on Monday at noon or Monday at 4? And I do want to point out that we will be hosting, in collaboration with Youth for Social Justice, an action hour, because yes, we can talk, we can hold signs, but if we don't take action, then we're not fully living our UU values. So this action hour will focus on environmental justice for all, a bill at the federal level, as well as making sure the Green Climate Fund gets fully funded with the US fair share. There's like 1.6 billion in legislation. We want every penny of that to go, because this is a debt that was that originated in 2009, and I showed you our historic emissions compared to other countries, and we the US very much need to contribute to the Green Climate Fund to help the developing, less developed countries adapt, mitigate, and get their hands on better technology. It's not only good for them, it's good for us globally. A little bit about Bill and I, your facilitators. This I'm adding to as I get the information. These are the UUs on location at COP27. and some of their focus areas. Daphne is someone that is very involved in the methane agreement. Cindy is focused on making sure that military emissions actually get counted instead of ignored as we try to track exactly where things are going with greenhouse gas emissions. Here's a little bit about our collective EU-wide collaboration on climate force displacement. And there will be more and more resources posted as the events progress. Okay, so we are over. I very much appreciate your time. I see that Tom Fletcher is on the call. Hi, Tom. He also was an observer at COP in Morocco, and I call him out because I just want to encourage anybody who has had anything to do with COP to please join our discussions and can contribute so that we can all collectively learn and take stronger action together.
Hey, Doris, this is
Yes.
Tom. Sally's got a great question about the timing with the Eastern Standard Time. And is the changeover to Standard Time accounted for in the?
Yes, it is. When I created that slide showing the time conversion, I put in the dates for the first 2 weeks of November. So it does take that into account. Egypt will be 7 hours ahead of East Coast, US East Coast Eastern Standard Time.
Thank you.
One slight correction, Doris. The on-demand recordings are not live; they are recordings, so you can view them anytime.
Correct.
You're not required to follow a schedule on those. You can just pull them up when you want to see them.
Yeah, and tomorrow we'll have some navigation instruction to help you be able to find all of those, because there are really hundreds to choose from. All right, are there other questions out there? Okay, so I do have a closing prayer, which is part of prayers for the planet, prayers for life as we know it on the planet. Unless Kevin wants to take over, Reverend Kevin wants to take over. Okay.
You're good.
I'm good. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Reverend Kevin. So this prayer was written by someone who is part of that Interfaith Liaison Committee, a Quaker, someone from the Quaker denomination. And our voices from faith communities across the world join in prayer and meditation for meaningful decisions and intention for urgent co-action at the climate conference COP27 in Egypt. We pray for courage and compassion to transform those human activities destroying nature and altering the climate system on which our lives depend. We pray our hearts reject fear and embrace love, hope, and transformation for a more healthy, safe, and clean, sustainable world. We pray for strength so that our lives are patterns and examples. We pray for protection of climate activists and environmental defenders who often risk their health, if not their lives, to break the silence. We pray for protection of climate scientists to work without intimidation and with sufficient funding and support. We pray for protection of the poor and most vulnerable communities, those least responsible yet most affected by our insufficient climate action. We pray that our leaders listen to, grasp the urgency expressed in the latest science and guide our economic systems to reject dependence on extraction, exploitation, and accumulation through dispossession. We pray for wisdom, courage, and compassion in our climate negotiations to find shared solutions together that honor needs of the poorest while reflecting meaningful action from the richest and highest emitters. We pray the developed countries will lead in greenhouse gas emissions and climate finance as promised in the Paris Agreement. We pray leaders in all countries will do all they can to rapidly reduce extraction and burning of fossil fuels and promote sustainable economic, social, and political systems to stabilize global temperature rise at 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. This is the last page. We pray that developed countries meet their promise of $100 billion a year to help developing countries implement climate action, money in the form of grants rather than loans. We pray for sufficient finance for loss and damage, supporting those communities already profoundly affected by climate change, no matter what we do. We pray for the Paris Agreement rulebook for ambitious, effective, and fair compliance in common timeframes and transparency in reporting. We pray for human rights and Indigenous peoples' rights to be included and better protected, including protection of these rights in carbon trading schemes. We pray for an inclusive conference in which the voices of the least powerful are heard alongside the most powerful. We pray that the delegates attending the COP remain healthy and return home in peace. All right, well, much appreciated. Hope to see, I'm not sharing video. Okay, we hope to see everyone at some point. You know, of course, we don't expect everybody to be there every minute. Hey, Catherine. Yeah, Catherine is always babysitting and rarely can actually make it. So anyway, much gratitude for attending tonight. If we will close, we will formally close right now. If anybody has some lingering questions or things they want to discuss, I normally, Phil does. I normally hang on. Oh, you don't. Oh, you're saying goodbye. Okay. I normally hang on for a few minutes after 9. We call it overtime. So thank you, and see some of you tomorrow at 7 maybe.